Good morning, everyone. It's December 23rd. Welcome to the second episode of The Ignition, your unfiltered source for the important news you need to know to preserve your democracy, to go out and make a difference. But most importantly, the antidote to all this shit is truth. So let's get into what's actually happening, past the censors, past the billionaires. And thank you all for subscribing. We are using Substack to launch this particular podcast, which is new for us. So a little bit unfamiliar with that. Thanks for following along as I learn the new process and flow. So if you happen to be a subscriber to the Rebel Radio Substack and you don't want to be following the podcast, it's no hurt feelings. Go ahead and click on subscribe. But if you like what you're hearing, I'm asking you to go ahead and support us and let other people know about this great unfiltered source for all the important news that's happening, not only in the country, but around the world. We're going to give you balanced news. And when I say balanced, what I really mean is the truth. And we're going to give you some positive updates here and there because everybody needs to hear some positive updates. And then this will tie back, of course, to our show sponsor, Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise, where you can get the actual tactical steps on how to be a better citizen, preserve your democracy, and, just be an overall cool person. So let's get into the top stories for today, December 23rd. Happy Christmas Eve to all of you out there. And for those of you who don't celebrate, happy second episode day of The Ignition. Whether you're celebrating Christmas or you're celebrating the show, I'm glad you're here. Let's kick into the top stories. Of course, our top story today has got to be the fact that the Department of Justice released a fake video of Jeffrey Epstein purportedly killing himself. And this is just one in many indications about the absolute failure of the release of the Epstein Files. What we're now learning, of course, is that the video that was released was a sort of grainy 12-second clip that shows a white-haired man in an orange prison jumpsuit on the floor of a prison cell while seemingly trying to choke himself. It was timestamped as 4:29 a.m. on August 10th, but what we now know is this video has been on YouTube since about 2020, and the original poster actually indicated that it was in fact fake, that they were rendering 3D graphics. Now, that's a whole other conversation we could have at a different time, but the reality is that the Department of Justice is handling this so poorly that they released this video that purports to show Epstein's final moments, and it just shows a giant lack of responsibility and honestly, a lack of seriousness in sharing and distributing this information. Of course, this coincides with the fact that they released 11 hours of CCTV footage from the correctional facility, which of course has the famous missing gap. If this administration is trying somehow to make this all go away, it's a gigantic failure. And I think we also have to ask ourselves, when the Department of Justice releases a video of a fake suicide with zero additional information, zero buffer, zero framing, zero narrative, we really have to start understanding what is happening to justice in the United States when the government is putting out fake videos. This is not acceptable. Our next story, still on this particular topic, the Justice Department today released nearly 30,000 additional pages of Epstein documents, and they're raising more questions than answers. So what we know so far is there's an email from a New York prosecutor that states that flight records show Trump himself flew on Epstein's private jet 8 times during the 90s. That's significantly more than was previously reported, and it directly contradicts Trump's social media post from last year where he claimed that he was never on Epstein's plane. Of course, 4 of those flights included Ghislaine Maxwell, currently serving 20 years for helping Epstein abuse these girls. And on one flight, the passenger manifest had listed only 3 people: Epstein, Trump, and a 20-year-old woman whose name has been redacted. 2 other flights included women described as potential witnesses in Maxwell's case. The Justice Department posted a defensive statement claiming some documents contain unfounded allegations against Trump and that they were submitted before the 2020 election. But here's the weird part. They're still heavily redacted and massive portions of the files are just not visible. This is causing more speculation, not less. And friends, it looks to me that it's a cover-up. Republican Representative Thomas Massie, man, he's just really... Thomas Massie's in his own ballgame on this one. He helped write the transparency law that requires this release. He's calling out Bondi, he's calling out Trump, and he's accused Bondi of working to redact and delete the files, or he has accused Bondi I'm getting ahead of myself, of working to redact and delete the files that she is legally required to release. Now, of course, Trump is defending all of this, and his response, he told reporters on Monday that the files are just being used to deflect from his tremendous success. The same transparency law that he eventually signed was passed overwhelmingly by Congress. By the way, it was passed with a veto-proof majority. And that's, of course, after months-long stalls. This is not really coming to anything other than just more conspiracy, more trouble, and more problems. All right, and our next story is really a very good highlight of why we launched the ignition. And it is because CNN is now reporting that, quote, this is the headline, today, 1 hour and 15 minutes ago, the U.S. economy was much stronger than expected in the third quarter. Well, let's actually dive into that because there's a much more significant story to talk about. So the article tells us that third quarter GDP came out Tuesday, and it shows the economy grew at about 4.3%. And they're saying that that is the fastest pace in 2 years. Consumer spending and exports drove the growth, and obviously the administration took huge credit for this, blah, blah, blah. They're calling them great U.S. economic numbers, blah, blah, blah. But what they're not telling you is about the K-shaped economy. And most Americans, by the way, are on the wrong side of that K. What's happening is wealthy Americans are continuing to drive that growth. We know factually that the top 10% is accounting for half of economic spending. Middle and low income families are actually pulling back. Consumer confidence dropped to its lowest level since April. So the administration can go out and say, oh, the economy's great, the economy's great, the economy's great, the economy's great. But if you don't feel that, well, that's going to take a toll. And obviously, we have job concerns. That is a serious problem. The unemployment rate, incidentally, just hit a 4-year high. And the share of people who say jobs are plentiful fell to its lowest level in 4 years. For the first time since September 2024, businesses now have a net negative view of the economy. So yes, GDP looks good from a 30,000-foot view, but when you actually go in and you actually look at what is happening, well, it's not a rosy picture. And by the way, they're going around talking about these tariffs. But let us remember that the Supreme Court has an active case where they may actually reverse those tariffs, which creates an open question. Will they have to pay them back? What happens with that? What happens with that? And obviously then what happens to the economy when that signature economic policy is reversed by the Supreme Court, if it is reversed by the Supreme Court? And of course, we will never know because the Roberts Court has essentially been a rubber stamp on the emergency docket for this administration. But because we promised to cover all aspects of these stories, I do want to let you know. CNN is saying the economy got better. We know factually that's not the case. Next story. Immediately dovetailing that story about the economy, we learned actually on the 21st that Jim Beam has paused production at its main distillery, and that is because bourbon inventory is rising. Why does bourbon inventory rise? Why is there more bourbon sitting on shelves in Kentucky? The answer is simple, because these products are on the front line of the trade war. Whiskey and spirit makers have really been dealing with retaliatory tariffs and just people actually in countries like Canada saying, no, hands up, we're not going to buy this stuff anymore. Not to mention that these are actually luxury products. So it's really a triple whammy there that's really impacting this administration's narrative, and it's hitting people in red states where it impacts them. I mean, they voted for this and it's hitting them. So you look at a state like Kentucky, you have liquor being a luxury product, expensive liquor in particular, being a luxury product. You have the trade war where not only are they getting retaliatory tariffs, but consumers in countries like Canada are just straight up saying, we're not going to buy this stuff. Then you have, the economy in general. It's a really bad picture. So CNN could put out an article saying the economy is getting better. But if you work at a distillery in Kentucky, you're going to spend your holiday worrying if you're going to have a job in January, February, or March. Those are real concerns. Let's take a break and quickly remind you that today's show is brought to you by Ignite, Fighting Fascism in the Age of Its Rise, our signature podcast, which is a way for you to understand how do you fight fascism in your local community. With 12 signature episodes and 3 bonus episodes in season 1, you'll learn the practical, actual steps of how to fight fascism, how to be a great patriot, and of course, how to just fix the small stuff. People talk a lot about Congress, but how do you fix the pothole 2 streets down? We teach you how to do that. One of my favorite episodes, by the way, that I'll reference is Be Like a Weed. We love to talk about on Ignite, thinking about like a dandelion. Dandelions can grow in the most inhospitable places. They can thrive where a lot of other plants won't. And, try to think of what it was like when you were a kid you find a dandelion, you pull it up, those magical spirals at the end, you blow it into the wind. Well, be like that. Be like a movement of a resistance in the wind, growing, glowing, and of course, subscribe to that podcast. Moving on to our next story. Moving on from the economy, let's talk about what the rest of the world is saying about the United States right now. This is from Politico and a poll from Public First, which says that America's closest allies now view the United States as a destabilizing force. There's new new polling that is really showing a gigantic collapse in how our closest allies are looking at us. So here's some example. There's pluralities in Germany and France, and now, of course, a majority of Canadians who now say that the United States is a net negative global force. Near majorities in all four of those countries are saying, quite frankly, they don't trust us. And now a majority of Canadians say that they consider us as not an ally, that we don't support them, and that we antagonize them. Those are my words. This isn't happening, of course, in silence or in a bubble. Trump called Europe a decaying group of nations led by weak people in a recent interview. And his national security strategy argued that Europe has lost its national identities and self-confidence. Of course, that same strategy has been far less critical for his friend Vladimir Putin in Russia, even as European allies are essentially preparing for war. Canada, of course, has seen the biggest impact. And as a United States citizen, I feel this. I see this all the time. I grew up on the border in North Dakota, and our Canadian friends and allies were some of our best customers, our best friends, our best tourists. And really, the lineage and the difference between our Canadian friends and ourselves, it was only a matter of an imaginary line drawn in the snow, as it were. But now Canadians are reeling and pulling back from their connection and the relationship with the United States. The head of Canada's Automotive Parts and Manufacturers Association described it this way. People lost their jobs, ones and jobs they worked their entire lives, and billions of dollars in capital in Canada evaporated. So how can you trust a country if you're one of those people who lost your jobs unnecessarily because of the whims of an insecure president? How are you going to trust America? The kind of work we're going to have to do in the future to recover from this epic damage, it's really hard to imagine when you think about it. In the UK, about 40% of people say the U.S. challenges rather than supports its allies. Of course, more than a third of them say America cannot be depended on in a crisis. I think most Americans feel that America cannot be depended on in a crisis. And 35% of those people view the United States as an overall negative force. Here's the weird part. 47% of Harris voters say the U.S. is a net negative force in the world, and that's compared to just 13% of Trump voters. More Democrats now view the European Union and Canada as positive forces than they view their own country. I say that's weird because look at how far we've fallen as a country, that a significant chunk of people who voted for Kamala Harris in the last election actually view Canada and Europe as more, I guess, open and friendly than the country that they live in. That's not the way that that's supposed to work, okay? 1 in 8 Democrats changed their view on the role the U.S. has played in history in just 1 year. And what this all means, of course, is that allegiances that have been built up for decades, and in some cases centuries, 2 centuries, are evaporating. They're disappearing. You can't just fix that kind of fracture, that kind of damage, and that kind of abuse to the relationship. I mean, if you lost your job in Canada because of a stupid tariff, you're probably never going to trust the United States again. And when you think about where you're going to travel to, I mean, just put yourself in those shoes. Let's say you were in Kentucky. Let's say you're one of the people that work at a bourbon distillery in Kentucky, and you lose your job at Jim Beam. And you know that one of the reasons you lost your job is because Canada boycotted your product, or consumers just chose not to, or they just took them off their shelves. How likely is it that you're going to go ahead and travel to Canada after you lost your livelihood? I think it's unlikely. And I think that kind of empathy of understanding our international friends and partners, I think that's important. And I think the saddest thing about all this, of course, is that when you really picture it, we're essentially all just on this rock. We're on this life raft called Earth, hurtling around the sun, hurtling through the universe. And we all really have much more in common than we have apart from each other. But these fictional differences and these geopolitical unnecessary strives in the interest of the billionaires, they're hurting us in real time. All while, by the way, they tell us, don't worry, the economy's great. Well, if you lost your job in Canada or in Kentucky, or if you're worried about losing your job next month, I think those imaginary truths are starting to fall apart right in front of us. And now we have polling data that shows exactly that. In news regarding ICE, we now have a report out that shows that 7 immigrants have died in ICE custody in December. December is not yet finished, but this is the deadliest month this year. Of course, transparency around these facilities, around how they operate, around the people that run them continues to decline and decline and decline. But now, with 7 deaths so far and more than 7 days to go in the month, we need to start questioning, what is it that we are doing? What kind of country do we want to be? The answer, of course, should be 0 deaths in ICE facilities. That should be the benchmark. But the idea that 7 people have passed away while in custody, that is something that we all owe. Those facilities, incidentally, are paid for and supported by your tax dollars. Your tax dollars have gone to fund those 7 deaths. It's not acceptable. And in other news, this is kind of our lighthearted story of the day. JD Vance apparently decided it would be a good idea to go train with some Navy SEALs. He did this for obviously what this administration does best, arguably, is photo opportunities. So Vance went out to go on a training session, and he's got some pictures of him running around a beach, carrying a big log, that kind of thing. But it's been really universally panned, especially by former military members and even people who look at this and see it for the joke that it actually is. My favorite one actually calls him G.I. Jello, which I thought was pretty funny. Someone said Vance is training for the Medal of Velour, which is pretty funny. I think the point here is that every time this administration tries to engage in these satirical photo ops, I say satirical because it is satire. JD Vance is not a Navy SEAL. JD Vance could not hold up with a Navy SEAL. Every time they do this, it just ends up showing the performative nonsense that it actually is. And now, it's shown up. People are starting to call it out for what it is. Here's what someone said on Twitter, which we don't endorse, by the way, but it's funny. You should keep running, and I don't mean for office. Pull a Forrest Gump. That's funny. As someone else says, a pathetic vanity project masquerading as training. JD Vance playing dress up with Navy SEALs while federal workers go unpaid during his administration's shutdown is a slap in the face to real service members. It's not a show of strength. It's a desperate photo op. And that's exactly what it is. And again, I think the part about this that, really should cause us alarm is the United States military is our military, just like all of the instruments of this government. Those are our tax dollars. Our tax dollars are not political props, because certainly Vance will probably try to use this at some point in the future, whether that's his future run for president or whatever that happens to be. And he's going to use it as a prop. Well, not my tax dollars, not my military, not my photo op. Way to go, G.I. Jello. And that, my friends, is where we're going to wrap this episode, December 23rd, 2025, the second episode of Ignition, your source for raw, unfiltered news, the truth in this time when truth is a rare commodity. And we're going to wrap it up on that G.I. Jello sentiment, because just like J.D. Vance running around a beach with a bunch of Navy SEALs, everything this administration does is deeply unserious. And it's not a real reflection of the values and strength of this country. Those men and women in our armed forces deserve more than to be a prop for a Christmas card for the vice president. Thank you very much for following along with the show on the second episode. If you do like it, please subscribe and follow along on all of your favorite platforms. We're launching the second show today. So deeply appreciate the work. And yeah, we'll see you. Merry Christmas Eve, Merry second show. It's great to see you. We'll see you around on the next episode of The Ignition.